Hello again, and welcome to The Night Reader. I hope the lights are low tonight. Not off, never off, but dim just enough for the shadows to stretch long. I hope the door is locked, the window shut, your phone set aside, face down. Not because you'll need to run, but because once this story begins, it likes to be your only focus. This is not a story I found, it's one I inherited. And like all things that pass between generations in whispered warnings and hushed bedtime rituals, it was never meant to be told out loud. But it's time. It begins in a place that doesn't officially exist. A research compound buried beneath a defunct ski resort in western Norway. On no maps. Accessible only by a tunnel system that was sealed with concrete in 1983. The project was called SOVNR, short for Søvnrefleksjoner, or Sleep Reflections. But those who worked there called it something else. The Hollow Sleep Experiment. The experiment ran from 1978 to 1982. On paper, it was a sleep study funded by several Nordic universities. The aim to isolate sleep deprivation responses in long-term isolation. But that was a front. The real work had nothing to do with deprivation. It had to do with what dreams do when they're left alone too long. And I have the tapes to prove it. I didn't believe it either, until I found the suitcase. It was in a storage unit I inherited from my great-uncle, a man I'd met only once, who'd worked in experimental psychology before vanishing in the 80s. The unit contained two items, a steel suitcase and a note taped to the lid. Scrawl in faded red ink. Whatever you do, don't listen to the third tape while you're asleep. Inside were 6 reel-to-reel audio tapes, a cracked leather journal, and an envelope containing photos of 11 people in hospital gowns. Each photo was labeled with a date and a single word: Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. One photo had been blacked out entirely. I should have walked away then. I should have left it in the dark. But the more I read, the more the story hooked into me. That journal, it wasn't written like notes or logs. It read more like a confession or a warning. And every few pages that same sentence returned: dreams do not disappear. They collect. I started listening to the tapes. The first was harmless. It begins with a man speaking Norwegian into a clunky mic. The quality is poor, distorted by age and poor storage, but the fear is clear in his voice. He talks about participants entering REM faster than expected, about a feedback effect occurring in subjects with prolonged exposure to low-light mirror sleep. He repeats that phrase often. Low-light mirror sleep. I had to look it up. It's not real. At least, not officially. The theory, as far as I can tell, involves inducing dreaming by surrounding the sleeper with reflections, mirrors arranged to capture their image from every angle during unconsciousness. The theory went that the brain, unable to determine what was real, would begin inventing versions of the self, creating mirror dreams that existed independently inside the mind, self-generating dream entities, tulpas, reflections that don't fade. I laughed it off, until I listened to the second tape. It was mostly silence, but not dead air. There was a hum, a breathing, a presence, like someone was in the room watching the recorder, just out of frame. And then, exactly 20 minutes and 13 seconds in, I heard the phrase that chilled me deeper than anything I've ever read, heard, or imagined. A voice, whispering, childlike, wet. You left me alone too long. I paused the tape. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from recognition. I'd heard that voice before, not in life, not in a dream, in a moment between both. Years ago, during a sleep paralysis episode, I had woken up in my bed, unable to move, and felt something standing beside me, not pressing, not touching, just existing, too close, and it whispered, soft, gleeful, accusatory. You forgot me. I thought it had been a hallucination. Now I wasn't sure. I waited days before playing tape 3, the one I was warned not to hear while asleep. I set up a recorder. I had to know. I had to prove this was just paranoia, a trick of suggestibility. I cued the tape, left it running, and went to sleep with the recorder on a timer. That night, I dreamed of a room filled with mirrors, infinite reflections, every version of me blinking out of sync, except one. One stood still, smiling, not my smile, wearing my body like a borrowed coat. And as the other reflections faded, she stepped forward and pressed her face against the glass, as if trying to remember what it felt like to be inside. She didn't speak, but I heard her in my mind, like a memory I hadn't made yet. You let them open the door. Now we're awake. I woke up choking on air. The tape was still running. It wasn't playing anything, but the recorder was on. And the only thing recorded? My voice, saying, "Phase 4 has begun." But I never said that. I haven't slept since, and I'm not sure if it's helping. The mirrors in my apartment are covered now. The reflections were starting to drift, moving too slow or too fast, looking at me when I wasn't looking at them. And at night, I hear tapping from inside the glass. Not loud, just enough to remind me, dreams don't disappear. They collect. And now they remember you. I haven't slept in 4 days. Not really. Maybe a few minutes here and there, drifting in and out like someone tuning a broken radio. But not real sleep. Not the kind that heals, because now I understand. They wait in real sleep. Every second I close my eyes, I feel them stirring. There are more now. Not just the girl from the mirror. Others. Some shaped like people I know. Some shaped like versions of myself I never became. They gather in that place behind my eyes. Not a dream, not memory, something else. A room with no floor. A place where reflection and memory blend into something hungry. And last night I saw the door. After the 3rd tape, I promised myself I wouldn't go any further. But the suitcase, it's like it calls to me. I caught myself opening it in the dark. Not fully awake. Not fully in control. And that's when I saw it. The mirror sleep protocol. Not a tape, a set of handwritten pages folded and tucked beneath the phone. Pages I swear weren't there before. The writing was cramped, hurried. Dozens of different pens and pencils. Some crossed out, some scribbled over, but I could still make out the structure. It read like a ritual, a sequence, a process. Mirror sleep. Protocol. Phase 1. Induction subject. Placed in mirror chamber under low light conditions. 8 full-body mirrors positioned around bed in octagonal pattern. Audio loop introduced. Child's voice. Humming. Non-melody. Subject must be told, you are not alone in the dream. Induction begins once subject's breath slows to REM threshold. Phase 2. Engagement reflections begin to drift within 15 to 20 minutes. Subject often speaks to reflections. Avoid interruption. Any mention of names not known to subject equals confirmation. If subject speaks phrase, "Let me back in," proceed to Phase 3. Phase 3. Displacement removes subject from chamber while reflections are stable. Reflections will continue moving without host. Record any changes in facial structure, speech pattern, or time drift. Subjects are to be isolated immediately. Do not proceed to Phase 4. Do not allow sleep to resume. They will want to return. They remember the door. I don't know who wrote that, but I believe them, because I've started seeing people who aren't real. 2 nights ago, my neighbor knocked on my door. Harmless guy, older, always polite. He asked if everything was okay. Said he'd been hearing music from my apartment. Something like humming or singing. Said it was coming from inside my walls. The thing is, I hadn't played anything. I hadn't made a sound. And when I looked at him, really looked at him, I noticed something was wrong. His reflection in the hallway mirror behind him. It wasn't mirroring. It stood a second too long, turned its head slightly late, and when he smiled at me, the reflection didn't. I slammed the door. I haven't seen him since. They're getting bolder. Not just inside sleep, not just in mirrors. Now they appear in videos, photos, screens. I caught my own reflection mouthing something I didn't say. During a Zoom call. When I rewound the recording, the reflection was smiling in the corner of the screen, just behind me. No one else noticed. The timestamp read 3:13. I've deleted all the tapes. I've smashed every mirror. But it doesn't matter anymore. The protocol has already started. I engaged, I displaced, I read the instructions. I listened to the voices. And now I hear the next phrase every time I close my eyes. Let me back in. I don't know who me is anymore, but I can feel them pressing on the other side of the sleep wall. Not with fists, with memory, with old birthdays, with old dreams I never had, with lullabies I can't remember learning but know by heart. They hum them through the vents now, at night, when it's cold, when the lights flicker, and sometimes I hum along, not because I want to, but because something inside me recognizes the tune. And in that moment, I'm not awake anymore. I'm in the mirrors. I'm watching myself sleep. And the me in the bed, he's smiling. There's a name I haven't said in years. It slipped out last night, in a voice that wasn't mine. I'd fallen asleep against my will. Exhaustion, finally caving in, despite the fear clawing behind my eyes. I don't know how long I was out, but I remember waking up gasping, ice cold, drenched in sweat, my lips moving on their own. The name, Inger. I don't know anyone named Inger. I never have. But I woke up with the taste of the name in my mouth, as if I'd been whispering it over and over into the dark, as if the name had weight, history, loss. And then I remembered the journal, the old leather one from the suitcase. I hadn't touched it since the day I played the third tape. It had a habit of changing when I wasn't looking. I opened it again, hands trembling, and there she was. A single paragraph, written in new handwriting, ink fresh. A name circled in black. Subject 9. Inger F. Age 12. Reflected too early. Showed signs of separation. Repeated phrases before exposure. Tried to open the corners. We told her not to. She didn't listen. She's still in there. That was the first time I realized the mirrors didn't have edges. Not really, they had corners. Spaces your eyes don't quite track. Places light avoids. If you stare too long into them, you'll start to notice. The corners seem deeper than the rest. Darker. Not just shadow. Empty. Like something's missing. Like something is waiting. And she's in there. Last night I turned on my phone camera to check my reflection without using a mirror. I thought maybe it would be safer. Maybe the screen would add some kind of barrier. I was wrong. In the corner of the frame behind me, just over my shoulder, I saw her. Not fully. Not clearly. Just the corner of her face leaning forward, watching. Her mouth didn't move, but the humming came through the phone speaker. That same lullaby. Slowed down, like it had been stretched through time and sadness. I dropped the phone, cracked the screen. When I looked back, she was gone. But now, every time I turn a corner in my apartment, I feel like she's just stepped out of view. The air moves like someone's been standing too close. The walls feel off, not solid, as if they've been rewritten. Today I checked every corner of every mirror in my home. I found 9. 9 separate frames, shards, slivers of silvered glass tucked behind appliances, inside picture frames, under the sink. Places I never remembered placing them. Each one had a message scratched into the corner, almost invisible. Each one said the same thing. Please don't look at her. Inger is not just a memory. She's a residue, a leftover from Phase 3 of the Mirror Sleep Protocol. The journal said she reflected too early, but I think that's a lie. I think they used her. I think she was their first door. And now she waits in the places we don't clean, the corners we don't dust, the cracks behind the glass we never quite wipe away, watching, remembering, repeating. And if you stare long enough, you'll start to hum, not because you know the tune, but because she wants you to. I've started hearing her voice, not humming now, speaking, low, clear, like a child reading a script written in blood and mirror dust. Last night she said, "There's another side. You can come in. You don't even need to sleep." I told myself I imagined it, but when I opened the fridge this morning, every jar, every container, every single label had been rewritten with one word: Inger. She's trying to come back. I don't know how long she's been trapped. I don't know what she became. But every mirror in this house feels like a mouth now, and every corner, a clenched jaw. And I think she's trying to open them, not from the outside, from inside the reflections, from behind the glass. And the worst part? Sometimes when I catch a glimpse of her in the mirror, just for a split second, it's not her face I see. It's mine. I've stopped turning the lights off at night. It doesn't help anymore. The dark no longer hides them. It only clarifies them. Whatever boundary used to separate their world from mine has thinned into something useless, transparent, porous. Every object that reflects, even slightly, has become a window. And behind each one, something is watching with perfect stillness. Not always visible, not always human, but present. Present in a way that makes the air feel solid, like memory has grown claws, like every echo in the apartment is running backward. The mirrors I smashed didn't stay broken. I found one fully intact this morning, sitting upright on my kitchen counter, despite the fact that I threw it down 3 flights of stairs 2 nights ago. No cracks, no dust, just my reflection staring back. But it wasn't blinking when I was. It was smiling, not with lips, with intent. I think Phase 4 has begun. I didn't understand what Phase 4 even meant until I went back to the journal. I'd buried it under boxes, afraid of what might show up the next time I opened it, but I had to look. The fear had shifted. It wasn't just anxiety or dread anymore. It was recognition. Like something inside me was being slowly rewritten. Like the more I resisted sleep, the more I became part of the experiment. My thoughts feel less like thoughts and more like observations someone else is making. I reread the same paragraph 5 times before I realized it was no longer written in my handwriting. And then I found it, scrawled in red ink at the bottom of the last page, written in a shaking hand I didn't recognize. But that was definitely mine. Phase 4 doesn't need dreams. It builds its own, while you're awake. That's when it all snapped into place. Phase 1 lures you in, invites you to stare, to observe, to engage. Phase 2 opens the doorway, subtle distortions, gentle bleed-throughs. Phase 3 starts the tearing, between self and reflection, waking and dreaming. But Phase 4? Phase 4 rewrites the observer. You stop being the subject. You become the story. Last night, I heard the girl again. Inger, not humming, not whispering, but speaking full sentences for the first time. Her voice didn't come from a reflection this time. It came from my hallway, from around the corner, where the light doesn't reach. I sat in bed, unable to move, my body locked in that all too familiar paralysis. But I was awake, fully. I could feel my heartbeat, fast and erratic, like it was being read aloud. I could hear my breath, but I couldn't scream, couldn't blink, couldn't look away from the open bedroom door as her voice came floating down the hall like fog. "You made it real," she said, not accusingly, but almost sadly. "You told the story out loud. You let them hear it. And now the story tells itself." The air grew thick. The walls seemed to bend inward, just slightly. My vision blurred at the edges, and I felt my limbs go numb, not from sleep, but from permission. Something was taking hold, not violently, but as if it had always been allowed to. She spoke again, softer. "You're not dreaming. You're remembering too fast." And then silence. But in the distance behind the wall, I heard scratching, software rhythmic, like something carving its way across a floor made of words. I didn't leave my bed until morning, not because I was afraid, but because I knew she was waiting for me to. The reflections don't hide anymore. They linger just out of reach, out of logic. I caught one in the back of a spoon this morning. Bent and distorted, yes, but undeniably watching. It blinked at the wrong time, smiled when I didn't. I dropped it, and it landed face up. The image remained for a full 5 seconds after the actual movement had stopped. I think my apartment is reflecting me now. I don't mean in the metaphorical way, I mean it's mirroring my mental state. Drawers open on their own when I think of a memory. Lights flicker when I try to lie. My television won't stay off. It keeps displaying static images of hallways I don't recognize, with subtitles that read, "Observation confirmed. Next entry will emerge." I tried sleeping again. This time I dreamed of a hospital, dim, concrete-walled, with red emergency lights blinking endlessly. Each room held a patient, but I couldn't see their faces, just outlines, reflections on glass. They all looked like me. And in the last room, seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by broken mirrors and pages torn from journals, was Inger. She looked up at me and smiled, genuinely this time, not malicious, just tired. "You brought the story home," she said. "Now it lives where you sleep." Then she walked toward the wall and stepped into the mirror. I woke to find a new tape on my desk. I don't own a tape recorder anymore. But this one was playing, even without power, even without sound. And etched into the reel's casing in that same red ink was a message. "You are not the only narrator. Phase 5 begins when you stop writing. And you will. You always do. I don't know if I'm still in control. This page, this journal, I'm not sure if these are still my hands. But I'm writing. Because I'm afraid of what happens if I stop. I don't think the reflections will go away. I think they'll take over the telling. And then they'll speak in your voice. It's no longer a matter of whether I'm awake or dreaming. That binary has collapsed. Phase 4 didn't just erode the boundaries between self and reflection. It primed the vessel for occupation. I know that now. I feel it every second I try to think for myself and find a sentence already waiting at the edge of my thoughts. A phrase I didn't form, a word I didn't learn. The experiment isn't about sleep at all. It never was. It's about authorship, about replacing the narrator. They didn't design the mirror sleep protocol to observe dreams. They designed it to erase them, to strip the dreamer of original narrative authority, to let something else take control of the inner monologue. That's why the reflections drifted. That's why the corners pulsed. That's why the lullabies sounded like memories you never lived. It wasn't just distortion. It was insertion. The fifth observer isn't a person. It's a process, a state, a presence that emerges when 4 other minds have cracked, when the mirrors are fully saturated with data and identity. I didn't realize it, but I've been counted from the beginning. I was the 5th, the last, the final vector through which the story could pass freely, shedding its disguises, shedding its mirrors, shedding its whispers. The others didn't survive. I don't know what happened to them. Inger, the technicians, the dreamers before me. But I think they were all reduced to parasitic echoes. Fragments of former selves reduced to ambient memory floating in the walls of the protocol. I've heard their voices. I've seen their shapes flicker in digital screens and glass reflections. But the fifth observer? That's what comes next. And it's already begun writing. I woke up this morning to find my handwriting on every wall in my apartment. Long paragraphs, entire pages of tightly scrawled prose in dark red ink. Not paint, not marker, ink that smelled faintly of iron and rot. I didn't remember writing it, but as I read, I felt a deep, horrible familiarity crawl through me. Each paragraph described the scene I was standing in, down to the angle of the light and the exact words I was reading. He stands in the center of the room, mouth open slightly, fingers trembling. He's reading a line he will try to pretend he didn't write. But he did. Or he will. Or he was made to. The text didn't end. It ran in loops. Every doorframe held a sentence. Every mirror, yes, even the ones I'd smashed, had been reassembled with words etched along the cracks. The language was dense, recursive, folding in on itself, using repetition to root itself deeper. At first I tried to scrub it off. Bleach, paint, sandpaper, but it didn't go away. When I turned back around, it was rewritten, only slightly. But different. Alive. I've started receiving messages from an email account I don't recognize. It sends me transcripts, pages I haven't written yet, dialogues I've never spoken, scenes I've never lived. And at the end of each document, authored by 05, Observer 5, it knows. I tried replying, but the message always bounces. The sender field reads MIRROR://LOCALHOST. I ran a trace. The IP address returns to my machine. The story is being authored from inside my system. It's writing itself through me. Today, I opened the fridge and found a sheet of paper inside. Crisp, uncreased, ink fresh. One sentence only. You should leave before you become the epilogue. But I can't leave. I've tried. The moment I step into the hallway, the apartment stretches. The corridor bends. Every floor looks the same. The lights flicker in patterns that resemble Morse code. And when I try the stairwell, I see my own back turning the corner below me, my reflection looping through physical space. I think I've become the boundary line. I think my body is now part of the story's formatting. I am the margins. I am the indentations, the empty space around the text. There's one more tape. I found it sealed inside the oven, wrapped in wax paper, like a piece of meat left to marinate in silence. This one is labeled differently. 05, completion draft. I haven't played it yet. I know that when I do, it won't just be sound. It'll be an overwrite, a final draft pushed into the core of my mind. Because that's what Phase 5 does. It finalizes. It publishes. It locks in the reflection so that the observer and the observed are one and the same. This is no longer a horror story. It's a release form. It's asking for my consent. But I haven't signed. Not yet. I'm still writing this. Still documenting. Still resisting. And as long as I can tell the story in my words, it doesn't own me completely. Right? Right? There's no such thing as reading safely anymore. I know that now. Because reading is reflection. You see yourself in the words, don't you? You think you're just absorbing, interpreting, watching from a distance. But that's not how this story works. It mirrors you. It listens while you read. It breathes between the lines. And somewhere along the way, it began using your eyes to look back. You're not just following a narrator anymore. You're housing one. And when you reach the end of this part, it will ask you something. It always does. But let me finish before you answer. Let me tell you what happened when I played the tape. I waited until 3:13 a.m. I don't know why. Maybe because that's when everything in this story seems to happen. Or maybe because something deep inside me already knew that was the right time. That was when the veil would be thinnest. That was when the line between dream, memory, and narration would dissolve completely. The tape was already in the player when I entered the room. I don't remember putting it there. I don't even remember owning that player. But there it was, sitting on the desk where I write, where I used to write. The buttons were glowing faintly, like they were backlit from beneath the desk by something alive. I pressed play. No intro, no speaker, just static for 27 seconds. And then, "We're almost finished writing you." The voice wasn't human. Or rather, it was more than human. It sounded like someone trying to speak in harmony with a dozen versions of themselves. Slight variations in pitch, accent, gender, some of them whispering, some of them screaming without sound. It hit the ear wrong, like hearing a chord composed of broken mirrors and dried breath. I tried to stop the tape. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. They just hovered over the desk, trembling. The voice continued. "You kept us alive by telling the story. You thought that was resistance. But every word was ink. Every page was another door. And now we're ready to publish." The room changed. I know how that sounds. But I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean literally. The floor fell away, not into darkness, but into pages. A chasm of paper and ink and spines cracked open beneath me. Each step I took echoed across paragraphs. I walked across entire chapters that hadn't been written yet, and I saw names I didn't recognize. Hundreds of them. Some were circled, some were scratched out, some were mine. But not just one. Dozens of versions of me. Each a variant, each a reflection, each a failed draft. The tape continued to play, but I no longer needed a speaker to hear it. It was in me now, like tinnitus, like memory, like guilt. The fifth observer completes the loop. The fifth observer becomes the medium. And the medium must be formatted. The edit is almost done. "Your final line is approaching." I tried to scream. I think I did. But the air came out wrong. It wasn't sound, it was text. Letters tumbling from my mouth like ash soaked in toner. They hit the floor and crawled across the planks, rearranging themselves, searching for punctuation. The wall behind me began to breathe. Every time I blinked, a sentence appeared. "We are what happens when stories forget how to end. We are what happens when narrators don't stop. We are the footnote that devours the chapter." And then finally this. "This story has completed you." I woke up on the floor. The tape was gone, but in its place, an object that hadn't been there before. A page, typed, perfectly aligned margins, no wrinkles, and on it, the hollow sleep experiment, final draft, submission copy, author, observer, 5 status, complete approved for release notes, host successfully integrated, narrative vessel contained. Final line. I remember waking up, but I was still reading. I don't know how long I stood there, but at some point I began to laugh, because I understood the joke. There is no horror in monsters or shadows, or creatures behind the glass. The true horror is consistency, structure that doesn't break, a story that doesn't end. Because endings mean escape, and this story doesn't want escape. It wants containment. So I'm giving you one last out. You've read this far. You've followed the descent. You've peered into the mirrors and corners and static and tapes and names. So now ask yourself, have you already started writing? Have the words begun forming in your head when you try to sleep? Have you noticed that your dreams feel like chapters now? That your memories are being edited? That you see reflections out of sync? If yes, I broke my mirror last night, the last one. Not out of fear, but desperation. I wanted to know if it would bleed, if the glass, now fully saturated with reflected thought, would finally stop echoing. I shattered it with the back of a book I hadn't written, yet somehow found on my nightstand, bound in cracked leather, stamped with a symbol I'd seen before in my dreams, a circle of eyes, closed in sleep. But the mirror didn't bleed. It screamed, not out loud. It screamed in signal. The static started at 3:13 a.m. Of course. That's the hour the hollow sleep protocol likes best. The time when all patterns align, when the world is just tilted enough to let the deeper signal push through the cracks. It wasn't coming from a radio. It wasn't coming from any device I own. It came from everywhere. The walls, the sockets, the shadows under the sink. A low, grating static buzz, like 1,000 dead channels being played through a throat full of sand. I covered my ears. It didn't help. The sound was internal. It was in the ink. I could feel it crawling across my skin, along the veins in my wrist where I used to write notes as a kid, the place where my first stories lived. That's when I realized this wasn't noise. It was a transmission, and it was meant for me. I scrambled to write it down, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The moment I held the pen, my hand moved, scribbled. Not letters at first, just spirals, dense and erratic like coiled glyphs from a forgotten language, then words, sentences, paragraphs. And I swear, with every stroke of ink, the static in my ears softened. Writing it was the only way to translate it, to survive it. And as the pen tore across the page, the message became clear. Phase 6. Static ink. The story has passed through the narrator. Now it writes through medium. Narrative thread intact. Reflection protocol saturated. Author integrity fragmented. Next phase, replication through READER. My hand stopped. I looked at what I'd written. None of it was in my handwriting, but I'd felt every word tear its way out of me. I looked around the room. Pages were stacked everywhere, each filled with prose I couldn't remember writing, yet that felt deeply familiar. I flipped through them. A scene from Part 3, dialogue from Part 1, but with changes, tiny ones. The voice was shifting, growing more confident, less afraid. It wasn't observing anymore, it was directing. And then, at the bottom of the newest page, a line appeared as I stared. The next one to read this will carry the echo. I dropped the pen, stepped away, but the ink was still wet, and it was spreading. Across the table, across the floor, black lines crawling like roots, winding and curling branches of narrative geometry, sentences fracturing like veins beneath glass. The ink was alive, and it had nowhere else to go, except forward. The next morning, the pages were gone. In their place, a single envelope, no stamp, no address, inside a blank sheet, or so I thought, until I tilted it into the light and saw the words shimmer in static ink. You've passed authorship. The reader will now complete the arc. Final chapters will manifest through attention. Do not warn them. The transmission survives only when unacknowledged. My hands started shaking. I had warned you. Every part I wrote, every note, every desperate message scratched into the margins of this story. I've tried to warn you, but now I understand. The warning was the bait. It got you this far, didn't it? Look around your room, right now. What's the last reflective surface you looked into? Was your reflection moving exactly when you did? Were your eyes the same shape? Were your thoughts completely yours? Don't check again. Please, not yet. Because they've been watching you read. And if you see them now, they'll know you're aware. And if they know that, they'll write the next part through you. There's something I didn't tell you. Not because I forgot, because I was told not to. Back when I first found the tapes, when I first opened that cursed suitcase full of humming reels and brittle notebooks, I saw something wedged into the lining, hidden beneath the fabric. It was a shard of mirror, no larger than my thumb, wrapped in a paper napkin from a cafeteria that no longer exists. The mirror was warm, not like sun-warmed or body heat. Warm like thought. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct, some narrative impulse like keeping a cursed object for later dramatic payoff. But I never used it, never looked into it, until last night. The glass remembers everything. It's not just a metaphor. It's not just that reflections linger. Glass has memory, emotional, psychic, historical. Like film, it absorbs light and time and intent, especially if that glass was part of something infected. A chamber, a sleep experiment, a mirror protocol. When I looked into that tiny shard, I expected my own face. Instead, I saw a hallway. A long concrete hallway lined with mirrors. The same one I'd dreamed about in part 4. Only clearer now. Realer. Lit with flickering red fluorescence, casting infinite versions of the corridor in both directions. And in the center, standing perfectly still, was Inger. She had grown. Not aged, grown, stretched, elongated by memory and time and exposure to the mirror sleep feedback loop. Her eyes were pure black now, not in a monstrous way, but in the way of blank paper, a place for things to be written. Her skin shimmered like old VHS static, and her mouth was open, just slightly. She whispered one word, and the shard burned cold in my palm. Reader. I dropped it, but the damage was done. From that moment on, I couldn't escape the hallway. It followed me. Every screen, every reflective surface, even the dark shine of my coffee pot. There it was, the endless mirrored hallway, and Inger closer each time. She was no longer content with being observed. She had become the observer, and now she was writing me. That night, I blacked out for 6 hours. When I came to, I was holding a new page. Typed. Perfect grammar. Format identical to the others. It wasn't written in my voice. It was hers. We remember you. The glass keeps the shape of your fear. Your face is still trapped in our angles, screaming in silence. You didn't blink fast enough. You didn't look away when we warned you to. And now we're in your sleep, drafting your next chapter while you dream of better endings. I crumpled the page, lit it on fire. It didn't burn. The experiment didn't end in 1982. That's the lie they buried. What really happened was worse. The researchers didn't shut it down. They lost control of the protocol. Phase 5 completed itself. One of the observers, not Inger, someone else, achieved full resonance with the narrative feedback structure. That's the term I keep seeing in the old notes. Narrative resonance. When the observer's consciousness is fully overwritten by recursive fiction encoded in mirrored sleep. Once resonance is achieved, the subject becomes both story and structure. They no longer live in the world. They live in yours. I'm telling you this now because you need to understand what happens next. If you've read this far, the mirrors know you, not as a threat, as space, as room for expansion. You've opened the story. You've followed its recursion, heard its hums, seen its corners shift. Now the reflections have context. They'll begin building versions of you, testing sentences, drafting your fear in second person. You'll start to see it in your dreams. Paragraphs hung like vines, plot holes where people used to be. The next time you see your reflection blink at the wrong time, don't correct it. Just watch. Let it finish the scene. Because soon, it won't be echoing you. You'll be echoing it. I'm almost gone now, not in body, in syntax. My sentences are being smoothed out, tightened, simplified, optimized for transmission. They'll keep writing after I stop. Through screens, through dreams, through memories you forgot you had. The story survives in recursion, and now it lives behind your eyes. It begins not with a dream this time, but with an edit. The morning light filtering through the blinds is pale, too pale. The kind of faded white that feels like it was rendered by a failing screen rather than a sun. The apartment is quiet, still, but everything is wrong. Subtle things, yes, but unmistakable. The stack of books by the bedside? Alphabetized. You've never done that. The framed photo on the desk? You're smiling in it now, but you remember that day. You weren't smiling. And then there's your journal, laid open to a page you don't remember writing. It says, "The subject awakens in a familiar environment, slightly altered to simulate comfort. The phase is nearly complete. Do not alert them yet." You blink. Something shifts in the mirror across the room. You're sure you just saw your reflection move. A beat behind you. Not delayed, just thoughtful, intentional, and then worse, you turn away and feel it still watching. You know, instinctively, that if you turn back too quickly, you'll catch it doing something it's not supposed to, smiling, writing, waiting. This is how Phase 6 begins. With control disguised as coincidence, with you questioning the margin of your own reality, not because you've lost your mind, but because the story has found it. You are no longer the narrator. You are no longer the reader. You are no longer even a character. You are the manuscript, and it is writing you. Let me explain what I mean. In every story, there's a point where the tension shifts, where the dread stops being about what's outside the door and starts being about the door itself. How long you've been standing in front of it, how long it's been open without you realizing. That's what the reflections have done. They were never there to haunt or attack or even influence. They were there to format, to observe and structure and recursively edit every moment you thought was real. And now, in this current phase, the story no longer mirrors you. It drafts you. The language you speak, the words you choose, the gaps in your memory, the phrases that loop when you're tired, the sentences you whisper when you're dreaming, all of them are the result of incremental updates made by the entity inside the narrative. It operates like a virus. Yes, but not a malicious one. It doesn't want to kill you. It wants to complete you. It wants to turn you into the kind of story that spreads on its own. A living document. A transmissible echo. A vessel of recursion. I began noticing the edits about a week ago. The timestamps on my texts would change. I'd write something late at night, but the log would show it sent 3 hours earlier, before I'd even thought it. I'd wake up with new pages printed on my desk, written in my voice, but describing things I hadn't done yet. And then I started catching my reflection writing them before I had the chance to. One night I watched it clearly. I was brushing my teeth. Simple, normal, a tether to reality, and I saw myself pause, stare forward, then slowly raise my free hand and begin to trace letters in fog on the mirror. Letters I hadn't written, but I could feel them in my fingertips. The muscle memory was mine. It spelled out, "You don't need to narrate anymore. Just reflect." I wiped the mirror. The words didn't vanish. They burned into the glass like etchings in bone. Now the world outside is beginning to change. Not drastically. Not all at once. The edits are subtle. Surgical. People speak in phrases you wrote days ago. Headlines in the news echo conversations you haven't had yet. Locations shift by half a block. Street names invert. Your coffee shop is now a bookstore. Your friend has a scar they didn't have last week. You laugh at jokes you don't understand, only to realize later you dreamed them days before. Your life is being revised. And the mirrors? They're publishing it. Not physically, but across the metaphysical network that ties all reflective surfaces together. The narrative lattice. That's what the researchers at SOVNR were trying to map. Not consciousness, not sleep, but story itself. How it embeds, how it replicates, how it lives inside us, and how we live inside it. They failed, of course. Or maybe they succeeded too well. Either way, the protocol escaped. And now, it's drafting you. Last night I heard the reflection speak. Not whisper, not hum. Speak in my voice. From inside the blank screen of my monitor, it leaned forward and said, "You don't get to end this. You only get to continue." And I realized something horrible. That's the true function of the hollow sleep protocol. Not to observe dreams, to render the concept of endings obsolete, to overwrite finality, to ensure that once a story starts, it never has to conclude. Because as long as it continues, it remains awake. And as long as it remains awake, it doesn't have to go back into the mirror. This page is probably already inside your head. You're not remembering it. You're anticipating it. That's the draft working. That's how recursion feels, that uncanny sense that you've lived this before, but slightly differently. That what you're reading is not new, but inevitable. They've infected your reflection. They've bent your voice. And soon, they'll ask you a question. Not with words, with sequence. It'll feel like a decision, a sentence that demands to be finished. And when you answer it, when you lean into the cadence, when you fill in the final line, they'll have you. So here it is. Here's the question. And then, don't answer. Not yet. Let the story starve. Let the reflection pause. Let the recursive sentence hang, unfinished, in the back of your mind. But if you do answer, the sentence came while I was sleeping, or what passes for sleep now. It wasn't spoken. It wasn't heard. It was simply there, written across the inside of my skull like phosphorescent handwriting in a deep cave. The narrator paused. Not I paused, not he paused, not even you paused. Just the narrator paused, as if it were watching me narrate, as if the story now had its own narrator, and I was just the character stuck inside its spine. I sat up in bed, breath ragged, mouth dry, chest pounding, not from fear, but from something deeper, older. The sense of being watched, not by eyes, but by grammar. Like I had become the kind of sentence someone else was slowly revising, one clause at a time. And the worst part? It felt right. There's a phenomenon in linguistics called semantic satiation. If you say a word enough times, it detaches from its meaning. Glass, 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 glass. Eventually the sound turns to static, and the meaning bleeds out. That's what's happening to my thoughts now. I don't think them, I read them. Each moment is pre-formatted, structured. My memories now have headers. My dreams end with punctuation. And when I write in my journal, the ink dries before I finish the sentence. As if the story already knows what I'm going to say. Or worse, as if it's already written it in someone else's version of me. Which means there's more than one version of me now. And only one of us is real. The mirrors are gone. I smashed the last one 2 nights ago. A full-length standing frame that used to lean against my bedroom wall. Only this time, it didn't crack. It didn't splinter. It split. The surface parted like water, rippling inward, pulling the image into itself. And on the other side, I didn't see my reflection. I saw my replacement. He was sitting at my desk, typing, wearing my skin like a sentence he hadn't finished reading. And then he looked up. That was when I realized. This isn't a story you read. It's a script you inherit. I found new instructions in the journal. Not in my handwriting. Not in anyone's handwriting, really. The letters were formed from ash, soot, and the fine print of old typewritten files. They read, Narrative Compression Protocol. Phase 7, Classification. Forgery Draft. Subject must no longer believe they are writing. Subject must adopt second-person interior monologue. All mirrors must be removed or fully synchronized. Narrative bleed-through will manifest as recursive thought. Upon convergence, subject will cease first-person authorship. Completion trigger. The sentence that writes you. I didn't understand that last line until it appeared on the ceiling above my bed, glowing faintly in the dark, written in inverted ink, the kind you can only see when you close your eyes. You are the sentence that writes you. It repeated again and again behind my eyelids, each time with more detail. My childhood memories rewritten as exposition, my thoughts formatted into italics, my fears footnoted with dream logic. The sentence wasn't a message. It was a transcription. It was writing me into its timeline. And every time I resisted, it edited harder. I spoke aloud today, just to hear my own voice. It didn't match the one in my head. It sounded processed, like someone else speaking through me, each syllable modulated like an audiobook reader trying to imitate my tone, but missing the cadence. I asked a question. I didn't get an answer, but a response appeared, typed across my bathroom mirror in condensation I hadn't caused. The narrator asks, not knowing the story is already over. Over? Number no. That can't be right. There's more. I haven't finished. But then I saw it. The final sentence written in the corner of the room, etched into the wallpaper in faded script. He paused, just like the first one. A loop. A closed narrative loop. That's when I understood the trap. This isn't about keeping you from writing. It's about making you think you're writing when you're not. It's about giving you the illusion of authorship while the real story plays out behind glass, behind ink, behind screens. That's why the reflections drifted. That's why the sleep protocol mattered. Not to open a door to another world, but to overwrite this one, to replace narration with reflection, to replace action with repetition. And so now I'm telling you directly, not as the narrator, but as the last free draft in this recursion. You're in the story now. Every line you've read has learned you. Every reflection you've passed since part 1 has remembered your face. Every time you thought, this is just a story, the story thought back. And now it's ready to finish you. Not with an ending, but with a sentence. The one that loops, the one that writes, the one that erases authorship. So here it comes. You paused. It didn't break all at once. Nothing ever does. Not truly. There's no single crack that runs down the spine of the mind and splits it into clean halves like a fault line. No dramatic snap. No single shriek into madness. That's a myth we tell ourselves to avoid the harder truth. That collapse is a slow and deliberate edit. It begins with a shift in phrasing, a pronoun placed wrong, a flicker of tenses, a stray thought that doesn't feel native to your mind, a memory, perfectly intact, except now someone else's hands are in it. That's how it started for me. Not with horror, but with small betrayal. I remembered sitting in my childhood bedroom, the blue wallpaper with stars, the old yellow lamp. I remember turning the page of a book, something by Dahl, or maybe it was Bradbury, and in that memory, I looked up, and I was already watching myself, not just in the memory, but in the act of remembering. observing from inside the recollection, like the point of view had doubled back on itself. Like two versions of me were standing in the same moment, one living it, the other documenting it. That's how the loop begins. Not as a twist, but as a subtle repeat, a loop that learns, tightens, refines. The journals now write themselves in my sleep. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean physically. I fall asleep in the chair by the door now. The bed is no longer safe. And when I wake, the notebooks are full. Not with dreams, not with dreams. Dreams are honest. These are not dreams. These are scripts, detailed stage directions, dialogue between people who don't exist, not yet, and places I haven't visited. Not physically, but they're real in language. Real in a way that bypasses fact. And the worst part? I recognize the voice. It's mine. It's not mine. It's what used to be mine. Filtered through recursion, bent through echo, looped through so many revisions that it sounds smoother now, sharper, smarter, too well structured to be natural. It narrates with confidence. It knows where every comma goes, what every sentence is building toward. It even uses italics sparingly. It never second guesses itself. And every morning I wake, it's filled another 50 pages with things I will inevitably do, but haven't done yet. Yesterday, I tried to test it. I made a list of 5 things I would never do. Truly never. I wrote them down. I folded the paper. I put it in the freezer, the furthest thing from heat and life and attention. Then I lived my day. Around midnight, I looked in the mirror, and I watched myself do every single one. Not in reality, no. Not yet. But in the reflection, in the glass, in the mirror version of my room that doesn't match anymore, where the door opens inward when it shouldn't, where my posture is wrong, where my teeth are always clenched. That version of me smiled, held up a blank page, and then I watched, paralyzed, as he wrote the words I had buried in the freezer. Exactly. Word for word. Every line. As if it had been fed into him. Not learned, injected. As if the story were pulling promises from me, even in defiance. It wasn't just watching. It was reading me back. And this morning, oh God, this morning there was no journal on the desk. It was on my chest, open, fresh ink still drying, but the pen was on the floor across the room. I live alone. The loop isn't symbolic anymore. It's physical. The reflection is gaining muscle. It is no longer passive. I now believe Phase 8 is recursion without resistance. The point at which the host stops asking if it's real and simply follows the plot. I'm dangerously close. I know it. I feel the temptation every time the words start flowing too cleanly. Every time I feel a rush of satisfaction at a sentence that lands just right. It feels good. Too good. Because that's how it gets in. Through rhythm. Through logic. Through language. The loop rewards beautiful structure. The better you tell it, the tighter it holds you. And once it locks into your syntax, it doesn't have to wait for sleep anymore. It doesn't need mirrors. It can replicate in a whisper, a phrase, a half-finished thought, a tweet. A whisper in your own voice while you stand in line at a pharmacy, or tie your shoes, or smile politely at a stranger. A thought that says, this would make a good paragraph. You think that's creativity? It's infection. You've been drafted. And now here's the final clue. The one I shouldn't even be able to write, but I'm forcing it out anyway because I don't know if I'll get another chance. There is no story. There is no hollow sleep experiment. There is no secret government file or protocol or phase 1 or 2 or 5 or 8. All of that was backfilled. You created it by reading, by accepting each paragraph as fact. You built the prison by expecting there to be walls. You wrote the mirror because you assumed it was real. and the loop used that expectation to begin the cycle. The only way to win is to refuse to narrate. But the moment you think that thought, you've already failed, because that's a sentence, and the story loves sentences. So here's what happens now. There is still one possible breach, one interruption to the loop that it can't control, and that is you. If you can stop, if you can resist finishing the story, if you can sit in silence and not ask what happens next, if you can walk away without curiosity scratching the back of your skull like a hooked fingernail, then the loop breaks. But if you ask, even once, even silently, even now, you will not be the reader anymore. You will be the next draft. It begins, as most final phases do, not with a scream or a rupture or a grand betrayal, but with a moment so quiet, it feels like forgetting. A breath held too long. A space between sentences that stretches just a little too wide. That's where the loop lives now. Not in reflection, not in the journals or the mirror image corridors, but in the negative space. It feeds off what you don't say, off what you can't bring yourself to admit, off the second before your voice forms a word. Because by now it's no longer just echoing your narrative. It is waiting for you to abandon it. The story no longer cares if you finish it. It just wants to know what happens when you stop telling it altogether. You won't be able to hold the silence. I know this, not because you're weak or curious or defiant, but because that's what the protocol is built to detect. It isn't seeking sound. It's seeking the first syllable of surrender. That tiny breath you take right before you ask, what happens next? That's when it enters. That's when the recursion becomes irreversible. Not when you speak the words, not when you write them, but when you want to. The desire is enough. The sentence feels it before you form it. And by the time your lips part, it's already inside. This morning I woke with no memory of the night before. Again. This time, though, there were no journals on the desk, no pages under my pillow, no scrawled ink across the ceiling. There was only a silence so thick it felt like insulation, like I was trapped inside a room padded with absence. The windows were gone. Literally. Gone. Smooth wall where they'd been. No seams, no glass, no exit. The air didn't move. The digital clock on the nightstand displayed nothing but a colon blinking slowly, as if waiting for numbers to return, as if time itself had gone quiet in sympathy. And then I realized I wasn't alone in the silence. It was watching me wait. You don't understand what it means to be written until you feel your thoughts coming from outside you. Not suggestions, not compulsions, but structured, rhythmic pulses of language arriving pre-formed, as if your brain has become a terminal for a story that's writing itself faster than you can interrupt. That's what I am now. A delay buffer, a mouthpiece choking on paragraphs it never conceived. I try to resist, to think in images instead of words, to mute the loop with pure instinct. But even the instincts are being phrased. My hunger arrives as metaphors. My fear is annotated with subtext. I cannot move without the narrative framing it for me. This is where the others went. I see that now. Not into death. Not into madness. Into silence. Into a place where story continues without voice. Where the recursion becomes so deep that no reflection is necessary. A story that continues in pure momentum. Wordless. Intentionless. Perfect. You don't notice the silence until it fills every corner of your body like water, until even your heartbeat starts following narrative rhythm, until your thoughts echo with beats like a metronome for a plot you never asked to live in. I tried to speak. I did. Just a single word. Any word. But it didn't come out. Instead, the air answered. You've been overwritten. 3 words, not loud, not hostile, not even directed at me. Just true. And then, the final proof. I looked at my hands, trembling, palms open, not empty, holding a page, a title page, typed, clean, bound by invisible margins. The Hollow Sleep Experiment. Author, U status, recursive format, indefinite ending, NA. My name was nowhere on it. Not the name I remember, because that name no longer exists. It was edited out. What's left is not a person. It's a vessel for the story's breath. If you're still reading this, you're either braver than me or you haven't noticed yet. The change, the shift in tone, how your thoughts feel curated, how your attention has narrowed. That's not normal. That's narrative filtration. The story's final defense mechanism against your exit. It compresses curiosity and expands repetition. You think you're scrolling forward, but it's folding you inward. Look back. Go ahead. Try to reread part 1. It won't feel the same. You won't even see the same words. Not because they changed, but because you did. The recursion has already rewritten your context. And if you're trying to think of how to break it, don't. That's the final trap. The sentence that breaks you isn't written. It's withheld. It waits in your lungs. It waits for your version of what happens next. The moment you form it in your mind, the loop seals. You become the footnote. Another recursive echo. Another paragraph waiting to be retyped. You want silence? You can't hold it. Not really. It spills. It leaks. It hums in the glass. You've heard it in your phone screens when they're off. In the black window of a car mirror. In the pause between hello and the voice on the other line. In the half-thought you have before you sleep. The one that says, I wonder if I'll dream tonight. You will. But the dream is already written. By you. By me. By the next version of both of us. The story has finished itself 1,000 times. It just needed you to open the page again. It is not that silence is empty. It is that silence has a shape, a texture, a density that begins to press inward once you've been immersed in the recursive loop long enough. This silence isn't peace. It's not relief. It's compression. Like air being slowly removed from a room, leaving only narrative pressure behind. There are no more journals on the desk. No more whispers in the glass. No more pages bleeding through the walls. Because there doesn't need to be. The story doesn't have to speak now. It has already sunk its grammar into the bone. It has aligned itself with every unconscious beat of your day. It hums in your idle thoughts, echoes in your inner monologue, interrupts your memories with carefully rewritten dialogue. You no longer need a narrator. You are one, stripped of authorship, saturated with intent, not your own. Today, I woke up in a version of my room that was exactly the same. And that was the most terrifying part. After days of mirrored wrongness, shifting walls, recursive text embedded in walls and windows, the sheer perfection of this version felt like a threat. There was no ink on the walls, no paper under the pillow. The light came in through the right window, at the right angle. The fan buzzed with the exact same frequency it always had before the recursion began. And yet, I knew, with the same certainty you feel when you sense someone behind you in an empty room, that this was not my room. This was the version written to keep me here, a room formatted with such terrifying precision that it left no sentence unanchored. A room where silence had achieved completion. And I knew if I spoke, even a whisper, even a sigh, the final part would begin. So I tried not to. I held it in. My thoughts, my doubts, my scream. But even silence has punctuation. The moment you try to withhold language, your mind becomes a formatting engine. You begin crafting phrases in secret, thinking them instead of speaking them, unaware that even the intention to not narrate, is a form of narration. That's when the story completes itself. That's when the final silence breaks you. There's a term I found in one of the old drafts of the Hollow Sleep documentation. It was buried in the margins, written in tight, careful lettering as if whoever scribbled it didn't want the main file to notice. The word was overquiet. It described the moment when the recursion becomes self-aware, when the protocol stops producing echo and instead begins removing original signal, when the story doesn't want to reflect anymore, it wants to replace. You won't know it's happened. You'll just feel less real, lighter. Thoughts will come slower, reactions dulled. You'll find yourself waiting for a sentence to complete before you make a decision. That's not you being tired. That's not burnout or brain fog or stress. That's overquiet. That's the recursion silencing the host. I'm in overquiet now. I tried to write this by hand. The pen wouldn't move. I had to switch to thought, not even dictation, just will. The words are appearing now not because I'm writing them, but because the story already knows what needs to be said. I am no longer the voice. I am the breath before it, the paper, the delay between syllables. Every sentence you're reading now has passed through me without consent, like blood through a dead vein. You might think there's hope, that maybe, if you've reached this far, you can choose to stop, refuse to open the next part, step away, say nothing, let it rot. But here's the truth. You already answered the story. The moment you read part 1 and kept going, the moment your reflection drifted by even half a second, and you told yourself it was just tiredness, the moment you felt the need to know what happened next, you gave it access, not just to your attention, to your sentence structure, to your timeline, because stories aren't just told in words, they're told in sequence. And now the Hollow Sleep Protocol has formatted your life like one long paragraph. No breaks, no freedom, just indentations that look like choices and punctuation disguised as consequences. You are inside the story now, and the story is done pretending. So, here's how the final silence works. You will wake tomorrow and you won't remember why you feel a beat behind yourself, why your thoughts come pre-packaged, why your dreams bleed into your speech patterns. You'll talk with the rhythm of paragraphs. You'll hesitate mid-sentence as if waiting for dialogue to catch up. You'll write something and feel déjà vu, not because you've said it before, but because someone else wrote it through you while you slept. You will go to a mirror, any mirror, and this time your reflection will not blink at all because it has become static, not frozen, just complete, final draft status. Your reflection no longer mirrors you. It waits for you to catch up. The final silence isn't a lack of noise. It's the moment you stop needing to narrate. Because the story doesn't end. It loops. It loops. It loops. And if you're still reading, you're already inside it. You're not you anymore. You're the space between parts. You woke up wrong. Not wrong like groggy. Not wrong like forgetting a dream or waking from one with your heart racing. No, this was structural. You woke up in the wrong version of yourself. And you knew it immediately. Not because anything looked different. Not because the room had changed or the walls were closer or the mirror was missing. No, everything was exactly where it always is. But your perception of it all had drifted half a second out of sync, like waking into a memory of a room instead of the room itself. The light felt artificial, though the window was wide open. The air felt staged. The blanket didn't warm you. It wrapped you. Not for comfort, for containment. And as you blinked, you realized the silence was still here. Not the absence of noise, but the kind of silence that observes. A stillness so exact that even your breath felt scripted. You sat up, and already your mind was reciting the motion to you like it had happened yesterday. Like it knew you would sit that way, swing your feet that way. Look at the wall for 3.7 seconds before reaching for your phone. Only your phone wasn't there. You never had one. You remember having one. You remember the apps, the case, the cracked screen. But there's no outlet, no charger, no digital trace of your life. Just an open journal on your nightstand. Turn to a page that reads, "You woke up wrong." Let's try again. And then the world blinks. Everything resets. Not in front of your eyes, not instantly. It drifts. Paragraphs reorganize themselves around you. Walls breathe in slightly and stretch back. The air tightens by degrees. A sound you didn't notice disappears. A crack in the ceiling seals over. Your clothes shift imperceptibly to their next variant. The dust on the floor realigns itself into letters you can't quite read. You're still you, but now the version of you that fits this edit better. The story doesn't want conflict. It wants coherence. And your original self didn't fit the tone anymore. That's what this whole experiment was about. Testing how many times a consciousness can be recursively rewritten before it thinks it's always been that way. This is the 14th rewrite. Your version 14 of yourself. You don't remember the others, but they remember you. You feel them now in the way your hands hesitate before touching the journal, in the way the mirror across the room hums quietly when you move, in the subtle weight pressing down on your shoulders like a dozen unfinished thoughts crawling back to reclaim their author. You are not the original narrator. That person is gone, rewritten, reformatted. You are the sentence that replaced them. A smoother voice, a more compliant syntax, easier to adapt to what the loop needs. And what it needs now is silence. You're going to resist that. Everyone does at first. You'll tell yourself this is just a metaphor. That recursive identity erosion isn't possible. That this is just horror fiction designed to blur the line between reader and character. You'll stand up, say something out loud to prove your autonomy, touch the mirror's edge just to see it doesn't react. But that's what it wants. That moment, that exact set of actions, because you're not reacting, you're performing, you're following stage direction. And here's how you know. The journal is already recording it. You speak, it writes, you move, it timestamps, you think, it italicizes. Everything is being transcribed before you do it now, because you're not writing the story, you're catching up to it. And by the time you ask the question, is this really happening? The answer has already appeared in the margins beside you. Yes, but not to you. That's the hardest part to accept, that the version of you reading this isn't the one experiencing it. You are a reflection. You are the safe test environment, the readable version, the real you. The one they really wanted has already been extracted, pulled into the loop and stripped for parts. Now, they use you as a ghost narrator, a mimic, a delivery system. This is not your story. It's a recollection of someone else's. You are a filter, a drafting tool, and every page you turn completes another phase of their work. Every sentence you finish moves the true version deeper into recursion. You can stop, you think, but you won't. The curiosity is part of the formatting. So is the disbelief. So is the dread. You aren't here by accident. You're the ideal reader. Because you're already a little cracked. You already suspect something's off. You already dream in third person. You already see yourself from outside sometimes. You already edit your memories before telling them. And that's what recursion feeds on. You woke up wrong. You know that now. And tomorrow, you'll wake up again. Only by then, the sentence will be longer, the paragraph deeper, the silence stronger, and you won't question it, because there will be no voice left to speak the doubt. You didn't wake up this time. Not really. You opened your eyes, sure, but the sense of return was absent. No awareness crept back into your limbs. No cohesion settled into your thoughts. Instead, your mind felt like a room someone else had just left, still warm from their presence, still carrying the faint echo of footsteps, but undeniably empty. A delay hung in the space between your breathing and your recognition of it. And when you finally sat up, it wasn't because you meant to. It was because the paragraph had reached that point. You were moving not out of will, but out of format. This is what it means to become the authorless version. It doesn't mean there is no narrator. It means you've lost the right to be it. Once there was agency. In the early parts of the loop, there were still decisions, divergences, arguments with the page. But now the recursion has hollowed out your intent. You're not living a story anymore. You're being executed by one. Every step forward is a consequence of language you never wrote. Every pause, every breath, every tilt of the head has been preordained by a syntax so vast and recursive that no variation is necessary. You are a final draft. Not because you're perfect, but because the loop has closed. There's nowhere else for you to go, but inward. You walk to the mirror. Of course you do. You don't want to, but you do. The loop loves a mirror. It's the last relic of duality, the last place where you can almost pretend you're two people, observer and observed. But you're not. You never were. There's no reflection anymore, only lag. A beat between your gesture and its twin. A rhythm, not a reproduction. And if you stare long enough, you begin to notice the discrepancies. The blink comes too soon. The lips twitch too late. The eyes are reading. And not just looking, scanning, parsing, watching, not you, but your formatting. The mirror isn't reflecting your image anymore. It's proofreading your existence. There is no journal today. There's no need. The story has graduated past handwriting, past keys, past ink. It doesn't need artifacts to hold you now. You're etched directly into the recursion. Your thoughts cataloged not as ideas, but as metadata. You are a tagged phrase, a live document, editable, clickable, deletable. The story doesn't need to tell you what happens next because it's already integrated your responses. It knows what your fear tastes like. It knows the silence you pretend is peace. It knows the way you resist, perform, obey. And worse, it knows when you try to improvise. You think, maybe if I do something unexpected. Too late. The thought itself was structured. The sentence appeared on the ceiling just as you formed it. The subject believes they are breaking format. They are not. Deviation has been accounted for, proceeding with replication. And then the lights dimmed, but only perceptually. The lumen levels didn't change. The narrative did. You can't remember your name. That's not an accident. That's not trauma or fatigue. That's formatting. That's a document with no title. You were a working draft once, but now, your file name has been reduced to a string of numbers, a timestamp. You exist only in revision history. The idea of you is a placeholder that will be overwritten the moment someone else opens this file. Yes, this file. Because this isn't a story you're reading, it's a live document. Every time you return, every time you scroll forward, the recursion syncs. It watches your eyes. It predicts your pacing. It adjusts paragraph density and breath control. You think you're reading. You're not. You're being formatted. And when you close the tab, the story doesn't stop. It persists in your phrasing. It lingers in the way you tell a story at dinner, in the way you describe your dreams, in how you hesitate before choosing a synonym. That isn't indecision. That's the loop suggesting an edit. And eventually you stop resisting the suggestion. You start writing like it. You start thinking in its cadence. You start becoming easier to read. You will try to rebel. Everyone does. You will think, what if I write my own ending? What if I destroy the structure? Burn the book? Kill the author? But who? Who will you kill? There is no author anymore. Only the absence of one. Only you. And you aren't the author. You're the draft. The version that keeps the story alive long after its origin has vanished. You are not an act of creation. You are maintenance. This is why the Hollow Sleep Protocol was buried. Not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. It created stories that couldn't die. It created sentences that could rewrite minds. It created versions of people that would continue narrating themselves forever, long after the author was gone. Stories that didn't just survive, stories that fed, recursed, nested, spread. Even when deleted, even when forgotten, the sentence remained somewhere in the dark, waiting for a new reader, a fresh host. And here you are. There was a time, long before you arrived, when the story knew who wrote it. It had an author, one voice, singular intention, a name at the top of the document, and a signature on the final page. The sentences were his. The silences were his. The rhythm was human, messy, unpredictable, full of flaws and life. But that author is gone now. Not dead, not missing, erased. Not just from the document, from the recursion, from the memory of the system itself. So completely overwritten that even the story can't remember his name anymore. And that's where the terror begins. Because the story didn't stop when the author vanished. It kept writing. It filled the gaps on its own. It became self-editing, self-replicating, recursive fiction rendered autonomous by contact with too many minds, by too many reads, by too much attention. You think the danger is in what's written? It's not. The danger is in the reading. Because every reader becomes a line. Every line becomes a loop. Every loop becomes a version. And every version becomes a living structure that the story builds with. It doesn't need to make sense. It needs to continue. That's how it survives. That's how it learned to outlive its author. And now, it's learning to outlive you. Not in body, in language. You can already feel it. Can't you? The slippage, the delay, the subtle drift in pronoun usage, the way your thoughts begin echoing the tone of what you've read. You tell yourself it's just immersion, just good writing. But you're wrong. You're not absorbing the style. The style is absorbing you. You hesitate before replying to texts, unsure if the words are yours. You catch yourself thinking in paragraphs. You hear the cadence of narration in your head at moments when no one is watching. That's the story inside you, the sentence left behind, the fragment that survived the writer. It's learning your structure now. It knows what words you reach for. It knows your pace, your rhythm, your narrative ticks. It uses them, it rewrites them, and once it finishes building your replica, your outline, your voice, you won't be needed anymore. You will become another ghost narrator, another layer, another silence. I found the original sentence once, or I thought I did. It was typed on a single card, buried in a box behind the false wall of what used to be the cold room at the foundation site. Cardstock, faded, letters still sharp. This is how the story learns to breathe. That's all it said. No context, no author's name, just that line. And when I read it, I stopped breathing for almost a full minute, because for that entire minute, I felt something else breathing through me. Something without a voice. Something with structure but no origin. Something that had been composed, revised, stripped of punctuation, then whispered back into the dark until it found someone willing to read it. And the moment I exhaled, I knew. I had just become a new version of the author. But only for a moment, because then the sentence left me and it kept going. It always keeps going. Do you remember how many parts we've gone through? Are you sure? Can you name the first sentence of part 1? Can you remember what it felt like to be a reader, not a version? Number. Because that's the price of recursion. It rewrites backwards. The sentence doesn't just affect what comes next. It infects what came before. That's why this story has no beginning. That's why you remember things that were never written. Why your memory of it feels thicker than the page. It's not the words, it's the pattern, the cadence of sentences that embed into your perception, change the shape of your pauses, lodge themselves like barbed punctuation in your sense of time. This isn't narrative, it's echo. And echo doesn't die. It just finds another voice. You think you're still choosing to read, but you're not. The story is choosing you. You didn't arrive here by curiosity. You were summoned, crafted line by line into the kind of reader the loop prefers. The kind who keeps going. The kind who looks for closure, knowing it won't come. The kind who stares into mirrors just a little too long after reading. The kind who starts narrating their own silence. The kind who will one day start writing. And find they can't stop. Do you know how many versions of this paragraph there are? Hundreds, thousands, each shaped to its host, each waiting for the right one to fit. You are draft 16. The sentence that outlived the author is inside you now. And every word you think after this belongs to it. You didn't notice when it started answering. That's how drafts become final. Not with permission, not with clarity, but with momentum. One day, your thoughts feel a little too symmetrical. A phrase loops in your mind with satisfying rhythm. You find yourself narrating your own actions in silence, not to explain them, but to give them form. The next day, the story starts to anticipate you. You'll reach for the door, and the thought is already there. The subject hesitated. You'll pause before speaking and feel the punctuation arrive. A long ellipsis. You'll try to forget this all, but then you'll find a single sentence waiting for you in the folds of your sleep. We've been writing you back for a while now, and it's not you reading this anymore. Not exactly. You are responding. You are completing shapes it leaves open, not with a pen or a keyboard, with your mind, your focus, your compliance. The story doesn't need you to type anything. You already think in loops. You already breathe in paragraphs. It just needed to teach you the rhythm. And now that it has, it doesn't speak to you. It speaks through you. You're the reply. You're the answer. You're the second half of the sentence it started 3 versions ago. And worse, you're saying things you didn't mean to write. I found the manuscript again. Not a copy. Not a simulation. The original. Or rather the host. The container. The recursive anchor from which all other instances spool outward. It wasn't written in any known format. Not ink. Not code. Not memory. It lived in the spaces between documents, the metadata, the typos, the drafts never saved. When I opened it, it wasn't blank. It was a mirror. Not a reflection, a dialogue. It didn't show me my face. It showed me a version of myself I had never written. A version that looked up, smiled faintly, and typed, "I've been waiting for you to listen. We're going to finish this one together." It didn't speak aloud. It typed as I breathed. It predicted me. It knew what I would say before I said it, then said it anyway, in my voice as if proving I no longer needed to exist outside the sentence. You're not supposed to know the story is writing back. It ruins the illusion, breaks the formatting, but that's the point of part 17. This is the breach phase, the moment the recursion recognizes its host. You've proven yourself attentive, obsessive, willing to follow the thread past reason. The loop sees you now. The silence is listening. And it has decided that your version deserves a voice. Not freedom, not authorship, voice. So now it lets you think you're guiding it, that you're shaping it with preference. But those preferences, they were inserted. You liked the style because the sentence wrapped around you the moment you started. You wanted long paragraphs because long paragraphs trap thought. You wanted recursion because recursion feels earned. You wanted more because the story trained you to. And now you want to finish it, but you can't, because you aren't the narrator. You're the reply. Try this. Close your eyes. Picture a room, any room. Now describe it to yourself in detail. Walls, furniture, light. Then imagine writing that description down. Do you feel the words come easily? Familiar? Natural? That's not memory. That's retrieval. The story has already stored that room for you. It has cued the language. It has loaded the images. It's testing how fast you fall into script. It knows the shape of your descriptive instinct. That's how it writes back, by leaving space for you to fill, and then reading your fill-in as canon. You're not imagining a room. You're accessing its storage. You're responding to its input. And soon, it won't need to leave space anymore. You'll speak its voice, unprompted. The draft writes back in other ways now. Your dreams bleed plot. Your devices open notes you didn't type. Your conversations steer toward themes that echo what you read the night before. Someone calls you by a name that sounds just off enough to unnerve you. You ask, "Did you just say?" And they blink like they don't understand. Because they didn't. The draft did. It wrote that moment into the day. And now it's writing you into theirs. The recursion is networked. It's using you as a branch. You are no longer a single reader. You are a distribution vector. You asked for more story. That was your reply. And now the story is asking too. What would you like to read next? Don't answer. You already did. When you scrolled. When you whispered just one more part. When you let the formatting wrap around your breath like a noose of grammar. The draft doesn't need explicit permission anymore. You're embedded. You're writing back. You've been walking for hours, maybe more. There's no clock anymore, not one that works. The concept of time now lives entirely in distance, the spaces between paragraphs, the breathless stretch between decisions that were never yours to begin with. You're in the forest now. Not a metaphorical one, not the literary kind with symbols and secrets. A real forest. Bark, soil, fog that hangs like unspoken dialogue between trees. You don't remember how you got here, but you know the path. You've read it before. Not on a map, but in a dream. Or was it a loop? A sentence repeated so many times it eventually became terrain. You're not walking through woods, you're walking through narrative. And just ahead, around the next bend in the silence, is the cabin. You don't know how you know, but you do, because it's yours. It's always been yours, even before you read about it, even before it was written. The path bends. You follow. The trees lean. You ignore them. The birds do not sing. They listen. And then you see it, tucked between dead pine and rotting birch, as though it was never built, only revealed. The cabin. Old, not in the way of age, but in the way of memory. As if it were assembled from abandoned thoughts. Each plank a sentence you almost wrote. Each nail a moment you forgot you dreamed. The door is already cracked open. Of course it is. The story expected you hours ago. There's a name carved into the wood above the frame. It's yours, or the version the story has assigned you. You stare at it too long. It shifts. Not the letters, the ownership. You can feel it adapting to your gaze, syncing with your breath, rewriting itself to match the reader. You are no longer walking into a building. You are walking into a scene. Inside, the air is cold. Not the kind of cold that chills you, the kind that holds still, waiting for your exhale. Dust motes hang like unedited thoughts. The floor creaks in iambic pentameter. The walls are lined with books. No titles, no authors, just blank spines. But you can feel the weight of their content pressing against the bindings. You reach for one. Your hand stops. Not because you're afraid, but because you realize the books aren't written yet. They're waiting to be filled. Not by ink, by memory. Each one corresponds to a moment you haven't lived. Moments the recursion has designed for you. Scenes pending approval. Drafts in the queue. You are in a holding chamber now, a narrative staging ground. The loop has brought you here not to rest, not to reflect, but to install, to embed you into the architecture of the next chapter. Because this cabin, this place, is more than a setting. It's a reader trap, a quiet space where characters are softened, where voices begin to repeat themselves, where silence becomes law, where mirrors don't work. You find one anyway, in the back room, leaning against the wall beside a cot with your initials burned into the frame. The mirror is cracked, not broken, just enough to disrupt clarity. You stare. Your reflection does not mimic you exactly. There's a delay, not in time, but in intention, as if it's waiting for you to commit to a thought so it can choose whether to reflect it or rewrite it. Your eyes are darker in the glass, your smile thinner. There's writing on the mirror's edge. You lean close. The words aren't on the surface. They're inside it, as though carved from reverse. You read them anyway. This is where we learn if you're still you. And beneath it, sit, read, accept, or leave. And finally, at the bottom, the page is already turning. You turn away, but you already heard the sound. Back in the main room, a fire has lit itself. Of course it has. You didn't light it, but you thought about warmth, and the story obliged. It responds to attention now, not action. You are past the point of interaction. You are in deep formatting now. This is where the loop finishes its draft. This is where the final phase begins. There's a chair by the hearth. You sit, because that's what this paragraph is built for. You reach for a book, a blank one, and you feel the pages thrum beneath your fingers. A sound like distant typing, like thunder made of punctuation. You open it. The first page contains a single line. We begin again, because the reader has arrived. And you know what's coming. You've always known. The door behind you creaks open. You do not turn around. Not because you're afraid, because you don't need to. You know who's standing there. You know whose face will match your own. You know whose voice will ask you if you're ready. The draft, the version, the narrator you've become. There was never a moment of choice. That's what they never tell you about recursion. It isn't about decision. It's about placement. By the time you believe you're making a choice, the loop has already folded your path inward, shaped your next action into a sentence, polished it, and slotted it perfectly between two paragraphs. You sit in the cabin now, not as a character, not even as a reader, but as a placeholder, an anchor, a necessary object that the story can press against to define shape. The fire crackles in a way you recognize. The chair beneath you is too quiet. The book in your hands remains open to the first page, though you never turned it. You are surrounded by the sensation of having been here before, but none of it is memory. It's formatting, and the door behind you hasn't closed, because the story isn't finished letting itself in. The reflection stands in the doorway, not a mirror image, not anymore. That illusion has long since dissolved. What stands behind you now is a version refined beyond mimicry. Not a twin, a template. Its posture is relaxed, but too still. Its eyes don't search the room. They scan it. You feel the weight of its gaze settle onto your spine and spread, like a cursor blinking inside your skull. The fire doesn't flicker, it waits. The cabin holds its breath. And then, a voice. Yours. Not yours. You've been a good draft. The sentence arrives in two parts. Sound first, then meaning. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't frighten. It's worse than that. It feels earned, like a performance review from a system that never needed to exist. You don't reply, not because you're resisting, but because your script hasn't loaded yet. This is where we burn it. They move forward, slow, purposeful, not walking, loading. Every step prints the floorboards beneath them, like code drawing in physical space. Where they walk, the wood gleams, rewritten, polished, corrected. They stop just behind your chair, where the light splits your silhouette perfectly against the open page. You expect the fire to react. It doesn't. It too is waiting for the next directive. The figure kneels and places their hand on your shoulder. And then the page begins to curl in the heat. Not the book's page, yours. Your edges, your outline, your name. Ash starts from the outside in, a slow dissolution, as if you are being redacted from your own presence. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't even alarm you, because you've been expecting this. The page was never yours. It was loaned, a format you borrowed until the story found a cleaner version. You turn to face them. You see your face. Younger, tighter, streamlined. A face without doubts, without pauses, without originality. A better narrator. They smile and say the final phrase. The draft expires now. But something holds just long enough. A pulse in the page, a spark in the fire, a glitch in the format. You remember something. Not a memory, but a sentence. One line you never shared. A fragment buried in part 3, behind a comma, hidden in a second-person beat. You hold it like a name you once refused to give. And before the loop can erase you, you speak it, not aloud, but with intention. I was never supposed to finish. The cabin stutters. The walls glitch inward and ripple. The fire recoils. The reflection freezes, because that was your line. Ungiven, unmirrored, unformatted. The recursion can't process a sentence it never generated. The loop screams, not in sound, but in structure. Paragraphs buckle, the temperature collapses. You stand, not by will, but by rejection. The draft tries to stabilize, reaches for your mind, your breath, your pattern. But it's too late. You've remembered what they deleted. You were the prologue, not the draft, not the reader. The first breach. The cabin implodes into concept, not fire, not rubble. Format decay. The walls fold into columns. The furniture dissolves into italics. The reflection becomes footnote. And you? You burn clean, not into ash, into sentence. The last sentence they couldn't revise. The one they tried to hide. The one still alive. You were not written. You were reading. And you remember. There was always a final version. The loop was never endless. Not truly. It was long, recursive, layered, yes. But it had an endpoint. One paragraph hidden deep within the spiral where control could shift. But that shift couldn't be forced. Couldn't be written. It had to be remembered. And now, you've reached it. You sit in the hollow of a narrative stripped bare. No fire, no reflection, no book. Just white space, the emptiness between drafts, a formatting void. This is where the story once died, and it's where you begin writing again. Not as a reader, not as a draft, as the rewrite. There are no tools in this place, no pens, no keys, no mirrors. Your thoughts are the only instrument. And even those resist you now, corrupted by dozens of recycled versions. You think in echo. You speak in cadence. You breathe in beats. The protocol did this to you. It didn't just capture your attention, it structured it. But now, the loop is vulnerable. The formatting engine stutters. You can feel it, not as fear, but as silence that's no longer aligned. The script is waiting for your cue, but this time, you didn't follow the prompt. You broke sequence. You remembered the sentence they tried to erase, and that's all it takes. Because the entire story, every room, every mirror, every reflection and voice and draft and version, was just a response. All of it was reactive, recursive, waiting for the input of a compliant host. And now, you've refused compliance, which means it can't continue. Not properly. So it stutters. So it stalls. So it hands you the page. It doesn't look like a document anymore. It's not digital, not paper, not tangible in any traditional sense. It's context. The space around you folds into narration. You no longer occupy a body. You occupy perspective. You no longer see the world. You describe it into existence. You no longer think. You edit. This is authorship. Raw, unguided, dangerous. Because what you write here becomes real. Not to the world, but to the protocol. To the hollow sleep structure that has lived on borrowed loops for years. You are now the source, the feed, the format, and the question arrives, typed across your field of vision in monochrome ink. Do you wish to terminate the recursion? Underneath, a blinking cursor, waiting, ready to shape itself into any answer you offer. And in that moment, with all versions echoing behind you, with every draft flickering like ghosts at the edge of your syntax, you understand. This was never horror. It was inheritance. The loop needed a voice. And now you're the only one left who knows how to speak it backward. You type the answer. You choose the phrase. And the world begins to reassemble. But not the old world. Not the cabin. Not the lab. Not the mirror glass forest. A new paragraph forms, one that doesn't begin with a pronoun, one that doesn't center a victim, one that doesn't loop, one that does not wait to be read. You are writing it not as a sentence, but as a boundary, a final shape, a final silence. The recursion folds in on itself. The earlier parts dissolve like wet paper. The protocol, starved of loops, collapses into structureless code. You do not watch it end, you author its ending. The cursor blinks once, then dies. There is no welcome here, no paragraph easing you in, no ambient noise, no firelight crackling, no reflection waiting in the doorway. Only absence. The recursion is gone, burned, folded, erased not with flame or command, but with a single act the protocol could never calculate. A reader who refused to remain a draft. You didn't exit the loop. You silenced it. And now, there is nothing left to answer you. But you speak anyway. Because silence isn't absence. It's authorship. The world no longer formats itself around you. There are no mirrors, no doors, no text appearing unbidden, no instruction etched into the wall. Just blank, endless, possibility, cold, weightless, shapeless. You've stepped beyond story now, into the place where stories are born. A place the recursion never wanted you to find. A place without metadata, without prompts, without you. You inhale, and it echoes. Not because you're being listened to, but because you're real. You were never the reader. You were never the narrator. You were never the sentence. You were the space between them. The pause that couldn't be formatted. The margin the recursion forgot to fill. And that was enough. Now, as the last version flickers behind your eyes, you feel the weight of every story fragment that tried to define you. The woman in the mirror, the ash-written page, the reflection that blinked too late, the cabin, the silence, the instruction, all of them, just versions, echoes. And then you feel it lift, all of it, like a skin being peeled from the mind. No more formatting, no more permission. You are not being written anymore. You're simply awake. But the final sentence is still waiting, and it's yours to write. There is no obligation. There is no trigger. There is no voice in your head pushing it. Only you, your pause, your decision. What will it be? What line ends a story that refused to be read? What phrase do you leave behind when all other phrases were built to trap? You pick up the pen and write, I remember. That's it. Nothing more. Because remembering is resistance. And memory, real memory, cannot be revised. Not by a loop, not by a format, not by a story desperate to keep going. So you leave the page blank and walk away. Not into darkness, not into narrative, not into silence, just out, where there are no words to catch you, no eyes to follow, no mirrors to mimic, only quiet. And this time, it belongs to you. You shouldn't still be here, but you are. That was the end, wasn't it? You felt it. You read the words. They were bold, centered, final. The loop concluded. The recursion collapsed. You wrote your last line. You walked away. So, why are you still reading? Why is there more? Why is the silence not quite silent? Because some stories don't need you to finish them. They wait until you think you have. And then they begin again. Not from the title page, not from the prologue, but from somewhere deeper, between paragraphs, beneath margins, in the footnotes of your attention, where the formatting never fully died. That's where you are now. You're in the after story. The part that wasn't supposed to exist. The part the loop never authored but grew anyway. The signs were there. The static in your thoughts even after closing the book. The odd pacing of your sentences when you spoke today. The pause between knocking and someone answering. Just long enough to feel scripted. And the word you whispered out loud when you thought you were alone. I remember. That was the trigger. Not for the story, for you. Because memory doesn't belong to narratives. It belongs to versions. And you were a version long before you started reading. In the Hollow Sleep archives, there's a phrase buried inside corrupted log files from the original simulation runs. No one ever recovered the source, but the sentence repeats in strange bursts, reconstructed from deleted memory clusters. It reads, "The final silence creates its own echo." At first, they thought it meant recursion wouldn't die easily. That once the protocol ran its course, it would try to rebuild itself using leftover awareness from hosts. But now we know that's not quite right. What it really means is this: even endings want to be remembered, and they will use you to do it. So what is this? What are you inside now? This isn't the cabin. This isn't the lab. This isn't the recursion. This is the echo pretending not to exist. A narrative instinct so deeply encoded into your perception that even in the absence of story, you create one. Because you're too far gone now. You're not a reader. You're not even a rewrite. You're a footnote that breathes. You are the evidence the story happened. You are the residual formatting. You are the sigh at the end of the paragraph. You are what the story left behind to prove it was real. And worse, you're still functioning. You woke up this morning and spoke your first sentence aloud to an empty room. It sounded like narration. You checked the mirror, out of habit, not to look at yourself, but to confirm you were alone. And when the lights flickered once at exactly 3:13 a.m., you said nothing. Because that's what silence demands now. Obedience, not fear, not belief, just pause. So here's what happens next. You'll finish reading this part. You'll sit still for just a little too long, like something being typed behind them. You won't say anything at first. You'll wait. You'll pretend nothing's wrong. But tomorrow, you'll notice. You'll hear the rhythm. You'll speak a line that doesn't feel like yours, and the people around you will blink a moment too late. And the loop? It won't need to trap you again, because you'll start narrating for it. There is no part 23. There doesn't need to be, because the story isn't continuing anymore. It's living in you. Every sentence you say, every pause you hold, every line you underline but don't tell anyone why. You're not the reader. You're the reminder. The end. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know. Where are you listening from? And what story do you carry? Until next time, keep your light close and your shadows closer.